everyone, it's Mark Zielinski. I'm sitting here with Wiki Dave. How you doing, Dave?
I'm alright. How about yourself?
Oh, I am hanging in there. It is time for another Muplore, Panelore, whatever we're calling it. What are we calling it, Dave?
I think we'll just call it Mup Lore, but the Panathor edition, because we are starting a Warpath one shortly, and hopefully when this comes out, it'll be in a few days that we'll get the Warpath one. So we'll call it Mup Panathor Lore. I don't know. We'll figure it out. If you got any suggestions, let us know, because we're really struggling for it. Even though we're a lore podcast, we should be able to come up with something. I don't know. We're struggling.
Well, I like the Muplore Panathor edition. So
yeah, there we go. Muplore Panathor edition.
There you go. And then we have Warpath edition and Epic Warpath edition and whatever. So that works.
Epic Warpath. Epic Warpath will be part of Warpath. It's just, we'll keep the universes simple, because if we overcomplicate things, that's when people start to get bored.
Well, there you go. Well, I mean, you know what the good thing is, though? Champions is coming, so we won't have to worry about split lore or anything like that. So we won't have to have Muplore Champions Edition. So that would be silly.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be great to get... Hopefully they incorporate a lot of the book lore, because, I mean, over the past couple of years, we've had a lot of books drop. Like, we've got Honor's Price, Pride of the King, we've also got Broken Alliance. A lot of those... have very unique characters in there that would be perfect for Kings of War Champions. So I'm really looking forward to less about the game itself, but more about how, because this will be the first release since the Lore Council was established. So this is really going to set the precedent in terms of how they treat lore going forward. Of like, yes, we've got this Lore Council set up, we've got all these books now. How do we mesh this all together to make sense? Because if Champions comes out and it doesn't have any references to those books or to events that have recently happened, like the invasion of the Shires, it's going to feel like that it's taking place in an alternate reality, and we don't want that. We've got so many different Panathor games, I should say, that have been introduced now, is that now we have to make sure that they're all following the same timeline, because eventually if we keep excluding big events or big things that are happening in these stories, or not even reference them, it's just we're gonna have like an Elseworld kind of scenario. Is like which Panathor is the canon Panathor, and we don't want that. We've seen that happen with Star Wars. People hated that when Disney bought Star Wars and all that expanded universe lore got dumped, and there were so many good things there. There's a smart way to do it, but there's also the right way to do it, and I think Kings of War really needs some more cohesion with it when it comes to lore. Anyway, that's my rant about Champions, because we still don't know nothing about it.
We know nothing about it, but with the name, it's so intriguing. I can just, I just see Orion on my tabletop. So, it's what an opportunity to bring the Wing to Sar Publishing, the Mantic novels, and bring those characters to life on my tabletop. The Champions. So we'll see.
I mean, we already have Aaron on Kings of War. So Aaron from Broken Alliance, the Halfling. But Honor's Price is a good one. The Muses siblings, all three of them, they're perfect for Champions. I mean, even Darun, the middle child of it, like he's a very kind of, he's not a leader, he's a more of a commander. I think he'll be perfect for Champions. I do think also the Ascent of the Goblin King, you could get Grogger in there. And I know Rob is doing the game, so hopefully we'll see Grogger return. He's well overdue for it. And yeah, I'm really looking for, I think this is just the perfect opportunity to mesh those two worlds, to finally say, yes, the Panathor world is these books and it's the table, and this is what the Kings of War is. It's this really massive, multifaceted kind of world where we've got the books, we've got what's on the table, and it all works nicely, because people do love the multiverse. Not multiverse, I should say, just like the I wouldn't say cinematic universe, but the massive universe, like, Star Trek started it with like the movies and TV shows kind of all referencing each other. We can do it on the table. You just have to want to, really.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So, but I'm sure we're going to get more information about a month from now. So until then, I've got to wait.
Yeah, and we will obviously talk about it as we do these lore dumps, because at the moment we're just going to go through all the factions, and today we are going to do one of those factions that it's hard to define whether it's a faction or not, or whether it deserves to stick around. So that's why we've kind of taken upon ourselves to do it, and that's the Ratkin Slaves. And basically what Ratkin Slaves are, do they have a place, and what's really the lore about them. So that's what we're going to do in today's episode.
There you go. But before that, it's time for the news.
Yes.
Right?
You know, there's a way we can... Yeah, well, I mean, we can add in sound effects. So I've found a way you can add in sound effect here. So like, I'm going to play a sound effect now from the Halo show I'm going to do. There we go. So now I'm going to cut this up and take that snippet you just did and make that the news intro.
Oh, please don't.
I will do it. So from now on, that will be the news segment, because we've got to have to do something to introduce the news. So I'm going to use that until someone can find something different. So
there you go.
We'll go for that. So we don't have much news, as we kind of disclosed. I mean, we're just heading into 2025. Not much has been said. We did get the news of the Dungeon Saga Origin, the next two expansion packs, which came with the Kickstarter. They're being released. Not the Kickstarter exclusive. I think it was the Daughters of Doom, and I want to say something.
Mirror of Malice?
Mellow Maris. I was thinking Dryer, but I think that's the fifth one. Yeah. That's the Kickstarter exclusive. So yeah, that's being released now, so people can pre-order that and buy that. Really good. And in terms of the timeline of where that sits, it sits right before the first Dungeon Saga campaign, the Dwarf King's Quest. So they all kind of reference each other, and it actually references other campaigns that took place during the Dungeon Saga era. I think it was the Warlord of Harpy. I think it mentions something in there as well, and some of those campaigns as well in those campaigns. So it was interesting now that we're kind of releasing what was on the Kickstarter. There was always rumors that we were going to get reimaginings of the original Dungeon Saga. So it'll be interesting to see how we go there, because the models are different. Now, the things have changed in the Mantic world. I think it was 5 years ago since the original Dungeon Saga, something like that. So it'll be interesting to see what we do going forward, and how what they do, which I'm excited for.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that they continue to expand Dungeon Saga Origins, you know? I mean, yeah. I hope it just doesn't end with this, and it's like, okay, we're done. You know, I'd like to see a couple more expansions or something like that, you know?
I would like that too, and they haven't really dived into the additional Kickstarter characters like they did with Dungeon Saga. The original Dungeon Saga, they introduced new supplement material for those characters they introduced, but they haven't really done that with this Dungeon Saga and Origins characters, which include characters that are related to those original characters, like Padfoot. I think it was Melissa Padfoot, or what was that? Something Padfoot I think she's the cousin of Ellie McSween. So there was Ellie McSween, which was in the original Dungeon Saga, and then there was Melissa Padfoot, which was part of Dungeon Saga Origins, and she's the cousin of Melissa, who you can actually play on in Kings of War as a hero character, and the Halfling Army.
See, you talk about this, and it harkens me back to Champions, you know? So.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect avenue for Champions. Yeah,
absolutely. Get all that lore tied in. Boy, I can't wait. Okay, I got to get off of that. If you can't tell, I'm excited for Champions.
Yeah, I think we're all excited, mainly from a lore. We haven't had really a huge lore dump, because we're expecting 2 lore dumps this year. We're expecting lore dump for Champions, and also possibly 4th edition, whatever is to come. So I think we're all getting excited for what's to come. So the only news we really have, the only news that's really newsworthy is the release of the 2 books, which is The Claws on Plane and Through Thick and Thin, which it looks like they're going to be released in March, around about the same time as at Adepticon. From what we know is that they're actually going to have physical copies at Adepticon. So if you do have if you are going to Adepticon, please buy me some books and send me them to here in little old New Zealand. I'll be greatly appreciated, so I can load them into the wiki, because I do. There's going to be some good, especially Armada lore for the Through Thick and Thin, which I understand that we possibly may be having a new MUP Armada show starting soon. So it'll be interesting to see with more Armada stuff coming. So we've had the Forces of the Abyss army. We're now getting another book coming, whether we're going to actually see more Armada stuff in the future. So that's really exciting. I think if we buy the book, if we support it, we're going to get more of it. So I really want people to jump onto these books.
Absolutely. And Mark Barber loves writing the naval stuff. So it should work out pretty well. Definitely. And something else I have to mention about Adepticon is if you're going to be there, Wing to Sar is putting on a seminar.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, check it out. Last time I looked, there was like 56 tickets or something like that left. It's only $5. I forget what night it's on, but check out the event schedule and go and support Wing to Sar. We had a great time last year for the Wing to Sar seminar at Adepticon. So unfortunately, I will not be there this year. So I had to cash in my Adepticon trip so that I could go to England so I could go to the UK Clash of Kings this year. So it was a good trade, though. So but I mean, so everybody go take care of Adepticon.
Go there for Mark and for me. I mean, I can't go because I'm kind of waiting for a heart transplant, so I can't physically leave the country. So you go, make sure you go there for us, or pay for Mark's flight to get up there. We do have a Patreon. If we ever get enough, we can start to send you guys all over the country to actually attend these events. So it'd be great. It'd be amazing if we could ever do that.
There you go. We'll have to reach Dice Tower levels for something like that.
Yeah, let's calm down a little bit. But anyway, so that's the only news we have. Make sure you get your pre-orders in Wing Hussar. Show them that you want the book. Don't wait until after they come out because, sometimes, that doesn't really show the demand. They don't know people want these books, and the more that they can, because they use those figures to justify doing more books in the future. Is like, we've got 10,000 of these books sold. This is what we can make from them, and actually shows the love of the lore. We can't always show that love. Showing love towards a particular lore sometimes is a bit difficult, and books are a good way of doing that. So cool. I guess any more news before we leave it there, Mark?
No, that's about it for right now. I mean, it's just all speculation for what's going to be, coming this year. So, hopefully we'll see a couple of new factions. The way people are talking, I don't know if Force coming this year or next year. Who knows? Alessio said he wasn't doing fourth. Now he is doing fourth, from what it sounds like. So, command dice, no command dice, blah blah blah. Just don't mess it up, okay? That's all I say. Just don't mess it up. So
I mean, it's hard to when you try not to mess something up, you tend to mess things up. So all they need to do is just produce the game that you're proud about. Don't produce the game you think will sell. Produce the game that you believe that you're proud about and that you think is what defines Kings of War. I mean, the minute they try and be fancy with it is when you fail. So just do something you're proud of. That's my advice to Mantic. Just do what you're proud about and just don't mess it up.
There you go. And it all comes down to what you said. Don't mess it up. So
I mean, you can't control that. So just be proud of it and don't be silly. Anyway, we'll leave it there. I guess we don't. Do we have an outro for the news now?
Sure, because speaking of don't mess it up, well, let's talk about Ratkin Slaves.
There we go. All right, there we go.
That's a perfect segue.
Perfect segue. It's smooth, very smooth. All right, so Ratkin Slaves. The reason why this is a bit controversial is it's not really like a normal faction, right? So it's a kind of what we call a themed faction. So for those that are new to Kings of War, you got factions and you got themed factions which have a few unique units, but then it borrows units from other factions. Like the Herd is a good example of it's got a few unique ones, but then it borrows stuff from like the Forces of Nature, and that's how it fleshes out its full roster. So with the Ratkin Slaves, it is a themed list of the Abyssal Dwarfs. Now, the reason why that's Ratkin Slaves is different than Ratkin is there was something that happened in the lore that caused a split. So the hierarchy of, you could say, evil factions is that you got the wicked ones, and they have the Forces of the Abyss that are located in the Abyss. Now, outside of that, you've got the Abyssal Dwarfs, which there's an argument to say whether the Abyssal Dwarfs are sub-race or than dwarf, but it sounds like it's a more cosmetic thing rather when it comes to Abyssal Dwarfs, that they're just dwarfs that are more kind of the dark side. They're still human, or not human, sorry, they're still dwarfs, but they dive into stuff they shouldn't do. And so the Abyssal Dwarfs are their own faction. They honor the Wicked One, Argraphil, and she's kind of encourages this evilness, this dark magic that she can provide. So what happens is the Abyssal Dwarfs, they're a lot of infighting. They're very kind of like dwarfs. They're all about pride, but with the Abyssal side of it, they're all about being on top. They're all about being the best of the best, trying to screw each other over to get to the top. And so the faction under it, which is Ratkin Slaves, are essentially Abyssal Dwarfs that have managed to gather their own forces in terms of slaves. So we're talking about Orc slaves, Ratkin slaves, human slaves, and making their own armies. So you're not seeing a lot of Abyssal Dwarfs in these factions. You may see a part of the Immortal Guard, which are basically immortal beings tied to the Overseer. Is it an Overseer? Overmaster. What am I talking about? Overmaster? Yeah, Overmaster. And it gives them a bit, you could say immortality, but it gives them long life. And it's tied in with them. So you got the Abyssal Dwarfs faction, which is just a bunch of Abyssal Dwarfs, and then you got the Ratkin Slaves, which are just a couple of Abyssal Dwarfs with like heaps and heaps of slaves, which are, Ratkin and so forth. Does that kind of make sense? Did I explain that like it made sense? I'm not sure if I did.
It made sense to me because I read the lore. So, and I'm also building it, and I'm also building a Ratkin slave ambush army right now. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm trying to include more Ratkin. You could do basically a Ratkin slaves army that's all Abyssal Dwarfs, but
yeah.
So
but you should,
if
the
you
way
really
you should
wanted
see it,
to, but.
Yeah, the way you should see it is that if you were to make both armies, if you wanted to, make one more heavy set of slaves and the other one more about the Abyssal Dwarfs. So you technically could get like a mega army for Abyssal Dwarfs and actually make both factions at the same time if you wanted to. And the Ratkin aren't a native species to Panathor as well. Similar like the herd races and the Trident Round races, they were created but not by the Wicked Ones. So the Ratkin, I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way of saying this. The Ratkin aren't the Ratkin. Ratkin actually consists of 4 different Ratkin races within it. So people say Ratkin and they automatically think, a human rat and that's it. But there's actually 4 kind of subspecies for it. And the main one that you always see is the Gnorr. So it's Gnorr. So the Gnorr were basically an experimentation after 13 years by Brazak the Grim, who was the Overmaster for Zarak. He spent 13 years creating the Gnorr, which are a hybrid of rat, dwarf, human, elf, and goblin, which I found out, which is really cool to know that they're not just human rats. They're actually a combination of 5 different species shoved together, including rats, which do exist. Rats do exist, just humanoid rats didn't exist until this. And they basically were enslaved because the Abyssal Dwarfs they didn't want to do the work themselves, basically. The long and short of it. They've got this hierarchy. You don't see Abyssal Dwarfs doing grunt work. They got these slaves to do that grunt work for them. And so they created these Abyssal Dwarfs. And that's why you see 2 kind of versions of Ratkin. You've got Ratkin, which has got the rat head and then like the human body. And it's kind of like, I don't know what. Okay, you know how you see chickens, right, Mark? You know how you see chickens kind of lose their feathers when they're stressed out?
Uh-huh.
It's kind of the same thing with Gnorr. So the reason why they're skinless is because they're stressed out, they're imprisoned, they're kind of losing all their fur because they can't grow it. But then when the Ratkin eventually the Gnorr, I should say, revolted, that's when they're all fully furred. So you can actually see the differences in terms of which Ratkin are actually enslaved and which ones are not. So the Honor's Price is a good example. If you look in the front cover of Honor's Price, you see a Ratkin head with a human body. And that's really because you're not seeing the fur covering it because they're slaves. They're they're actually stressed out. They lose their fur. That's my interpretation of it anyway. Would that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Yeah, the Ratkin slaves are definitely much more stressed out than the regular Ratkin because the Ratkin escaped. So also, as you were talking about, doing all that work, they also were created to be sacrifices. So that would stress anybody out.
Yeah, so basically they were created, they were doing the grunt work, and then that's when the Ratkin that held for years. How long that lasts for, between when the Ratkin were created and when they kind of revolted, as we're about to talk about, it's not really defined. Dwarfs last for a very, very long time. So, I mean, Barazak, the Grim who actually created them, could be like 200 years old, so this could have happened really early on in his life or in the middle of it. We don't know, but eventually it led to what we call the Great Revolt. So the Great Revolt, taking account, there's obviously a lot of years past. Ratkin bred, they were forced to breed. They had different kind of breeds of Ratkin evolved. So you had the Gnorr, then you got the Brutes, which are the big muscular Ratkin. You also got the Nightmares. Those are the ones with the really long fingernails that you see that are more kind of like savage. And then you got the Ratkin Fiends, which are more kind of look like more experimentations. And to actually create those versions of Ratkin, the Abyssal Dwarfs do a practice called Blightcraft, and that's something that phrase that's been thrown around, especially in second edition. You don't see that much in third edition, but in second edition you had Blightcraft. So that's the crafting of, and basically biological engineering of the Ratkin is using this Blightcraft. And so eventually they kind of experimented with them. The Ratkin kind of spread everywhere, being these slaves, and eventually the Ratkin, mainly the Gnorr, because the other races, they were a little bit not as intelligent as the Gnorr, the less experimented on. They developed a language called Chitter. So Chitter is the language of the rat, and eventually they started speaking Chitter to each other, and I think there's a description about what Chitter actually is. I'm just going to quickly bring it up. I should actually have that ready to go. It can also be referred to as chittering, and it sounds like a gutter form language of the Abyssal Dwarfs. So it's a variation of it, and they've kind of like taught each other, and they started communicating, and eventually it led to a great revolt of them fighting against the Abyssal slaves, the Abyssal Dwarfs, fighting back, killing them, and they split. And then that's when you get the two factions of, you got the Ratkin, which are now figuring out their place in the world, and this happened around about the Edge of the Abyss times. So you could say I think it's 3,850 is when around about this happened. Again, there's not exactly a precise time it happens, but around that time you start to see references of the Ratkin being on their own, like the I think the Ascent of the Goblin King. I think that mentions in there as well, and it also mentions in Honor's Price about how the Abyssal Dwarfs have been fighting against free rats with their own forces, Ratkin. So it's around there. They're now broken away, establishing their own thing, and now we have the Abyssal Slaves. The Ratkin Slaves, which are just the Gnorr that haven't managed to escape yet, or the ones that have been enslaved, and they've been experimented on, and they continue to be experimented on until today. So that's why there are two separate things. So the Ratkin Slaves, they're the ones that are still imprisoned, they're being tortured, they're the ones still being experimented on, and then you got the Ratkin that are kind of trying to figure out who they are and have escaped. And we'll talk about Ratkin another time, because there's some interesting stuff that happens in their lore in the future. So there we go. So that's the differences there. Does that make sense there, Mark?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then we need to mention that Bazark, I guess, or how you're pronouncing it, the Grim.
Bazark the Grim, yeah.
The Grim, yeah. He actually got beat up pretty bad by the Ratkin slaves, and then he had to piece himself together with, different parts, including Ratkin slave parts. So yeah. I would love to see a model of him.
I think he would be a very interesting model, and I'm surprised because when you say whether who's part of a Ratkin slave and who's an Abyssal Dwarf, the line is very thin. And I think one thing Mantic should do is really define the two sides of, what makes an Abyssal Dwarf part of that faction or not. And it all comes down to them being more mad scientists, to be honest. And I think Brazak the Grim would be a really good example of how they can make them different than the normal Abyssal Dwarfs. And I think you're 100% right. I think that would be really cool to see on the table.
Absolutely. So, and I think that we might have mentioned this before. This is one of the rumored factions that are going to be facing the axe here with 4th edition coming. And I want to see no factions go away. So,
yeah.
I mean, though you could probably take your army and make it into a Ratkin and Abyssal Dwarf army, it's still, I
think that's when the conversation is going to go, because from a lore point of view, that's really all we've got to go on. If you do want more reading material, I suggest reading the Ratkin lore, the Abyssal Dwarf background, but also Honest Price, funny enough. So Honest Price is a new book that came out by Mike Rossi, and it is about the Demuse clan returning to Harpia, being kicked out. And it actually, and on face value, it feels like it's an Abyssal Dwarf versus a Free Dwarf story. But in reality, there's only two main characters. Sorry, spoiler. There's only two main characters that are Abyssal Dwarfs in the story. Everyone else is either a slave or they're part of the Immortal Guard, which don't have names, and they're kind of like nameless people. And it's all referring to the slaves that they use, so the Orc slaves and the Gnorr slaves. So I think the Honest Price is actually a good example of what a Ratkin Slave Abyssal Dwarf is actually like, which is insane, power hungry, all up for experimentation and constructing these weird abominations and making more species and making more experiments to fight in their armies. And I think that, funny enough, Honest Price gives a good argument to actually keep this faction around, because if you read through that, you're like, all right, if I was Mantic, and I go, all right, I want to make some really unique units for the Ratkin Slaves. Part of that is experimentation, making these grotesque kind of mutation breeds and weird. They could make some insane, gross Ratkin or even like Orc models of just what happens if you biologically engineer all these races that are in Panathor to use to fight with. And I think that's the direction they should go. They should go a little bit more, how Chaos is in Warhammer, that gross kind of look and that kind of like sick kind of like, tumors and all that kind of stuff. I think they should go down that route with these guys.
That's very interesting. Huh.
So what do you think, Mark? What do you think? What's your justification to keep them around?
Well, because I don't think they're going anywhere. So, I mean, the Abyssal Dwarfs aren't going anywhere, and they need Ratkin slaves, and, they need slaves. The Ratkin are around. I mean, unless they write something in the lore where there's another great revolt and they all disappear, and they go and join their Ratkin buddies, end of story, and then the Abyssal Dwarfs are patting their pockets looking for slaves again, and go find the ones that they've captured recently. But I guess that's one way they could break it down, and is that they all escape. They're all not going to die.
Yeah.
So,
well, the Abyssal Dwarfs already have, just in their roster, they already do have like Orc slaves, and also I think they have Ratkin slaves already in the Abyssal Dwarf roster. I guess what can Mantic do to make Ratkin slaves different than just Abyssal Dwarfs? How can they show that the uniqueness between the two factions?
Well, I mean, one, lean more heavily into the Ratkin slaves. I went out of my way to make sure that I had slave warriors and slave nightmares in there, and I've got two singular characters, basically. I just got a slave driver and an iron caster, it's one of my famous 500 point lists, but, I wanted to make sure that I had some rats in there. So I think they could maybe do it so there's less ability.
I think more slaves.
Yeah, more slave. It's kind of like more cowbell. I need more cowbell. You know, I need more slaves in my Ratkin slave list. So.
Yeah, I think they should dive more into the slave side of it. So not just Ratkin slave, not just Ratkin or Gnorr. They should dive into more kind of orc slaves or more variations of that, more human slaves. Because in Honor's Price, they do mention human slaves, and that are part of the Abyssal Dwarfs armies, which Ratkin, I'd say Ratkin slaves armies, and they mention a lot of the experimentations that they have with the half breeds and what they've done. I think dive more into what the Abyssal Dwarfs are doing.
Yeah, you know what? That would be cool to put in the elf and the orc and the goblin slaves too, right? You know, have elf, human, dwarf. That, you know what? That's not a bad idea, Dave.
Yeah, keep the Abyssal Dwarfs as the top, as the ones in charge, but just show the experimentation, because at the end of the day, the Abyssal Dwarfs are wanting to be kind of like the Wicked Ones. They like experimentation, they like manipulating and using magics that they shouldn't. Expand on that. Use them as a way of saying, this is what happens when races really just go off the deep end and there's no restriction in terms of magic and everything like that. And I reckon you can really just dive into that. Maybe even just change Ratkin Slaves to not just be Abyssal Dwarfs. It could be just people that are on the side of the Abyss, like humans or you know, other races like halflings and so forth. I don't know. Just a way of making them a little bit more kind of like they are the a bit of a cannon fodder for the evil forces that get thrown at it, which we've seen in Honor's Price and through the stories of it, is the fact that they're just used as cannon fodder so much. Expand on that of like, you know, that these aren't the best evil forces; they're just the most overwhelming. And I don't know. That's just how I would do it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Abyss, you know, obviously works with the Abyssal Dwarfs, but, you know, I think, personally, I think that they're messing with the heads of the Ratkin as well, and I think that they could mess with the Ratkin slaves as well, you know? From that standpoint.
Yeah, well, they can get really creative with it. I mean, think about, you could have, like, halfling Gnorr hybrids. Like, what about halfling Ratkin? That would be interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, that could be interesting. You know, you know, maybe even tie in a little bit of the Abyss, you know, somewhere in there. You know, maybe, you know, from a themeless standpoint, you can pull from two armies as opposed to just one. That would make it unique. You know, you get a little Abyss, a little Abyssal Dwarf, you know, a little furry rats, you know, see what you can come up with. So
yeah, I mean, why only pull from one list? I guess that's another thing. It's like theme lists typically pull for just one faction. Like in this case, it's Abyssal Dwarfs. Yeah, you could pull from the forces of the Abyss easy. That's a really good angle. I like that.
Yeah, that might be interesting. So, but I think that there's something to do with Ratkin Slaves. They're a blank slate, you know, and there's not a lot of lore that you could write like crazy. You know, now, you don't want them to overshadow the Ratkin, or maybe you do, but you know, maybe they link up. There's a lot of stories there.
Yeah, I think there's enough there for Ratkin to now they can really do their own thing. They're developing their own culture. They can kind of develop their own thing and get away from being slaves. So there's a lot of Panathor they can move to. So I can see Ratkin, and Ratkin meaning Gnorr, brutes, nightmares, and rat fiends. They can now go off and become their own thing. I don't think they should be an evil faction. I think they should move towards the middle, more of the neutral faction. I mean, I think there will be a nice change of like everyone still seeing them as evil, but they're not. They're kind of just trying to survive at this point because they're being hunted down by the ones that used to enslave them, but they're also being hunted down by the forces of good. You know, where do you land when it comes to that? I think there's so many interesting angles you can go with just Ratkin themselves. But in terms of the Ratkin slaves, I think now that you got Honor's Price and you got Pride of the King coming in and starting to push out the Abyssal Dwarfs, and you're going to see the Ratkin Slaves slowly decrease in terms of their armies. are we going to start to see them going in a different direction, away from Harpy, or more to the east? Because we do know in the recent Clash of Kings lore, we did see the Abyssal Dwarfs attack from the east side of it. So we know that they are going that way as well. So would we see that evolve? So you got a bit of a hierarchy now, is that the Ratkin Slaves are trying to establish new territories for the forces of the Abyss, or for the Abyssal Dwarfs, and the Ratkin Slave armies. So there could be the vanguard going ahead, establishing these new territories, and that's what Ratkin Slaves are really to do. So they're a bit weaker in terms of their overall firepower, but in terms of numbers, that's where they differentiate. So Abyssal Dwarfs are just, they're fewer in number, but they're bulkier, they're tougher, they're stronger. But Ratkin Slaves, there's more of them. There's more variation of, all these slaves. You got orcs, humans, you got maybe even elves. Hell, you could throw some halflings or dwarfs in there, but they're the ones that have been forced to establish these new territories and build new cities for the Abyssal Dwarfs as they trying to expand and try and survive now that the free dwarfs are taking back their lands.
Right. One of the interesting storylines you could come up with too is where the Ratkin try to, infiltrate in and, free some slaves to help bulk up their units, and replace their losses in the war. They're there, and, they could kind of rescue mission, so to speak. So that would be another cool story or something,
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see, Ratkin, they're trying to establish their own communities, their own lands, and they need the numbers to do that. We don't know how quickly they reproduce. We assume that they were bred to reproduce rather quickly, but in terms of how quick that actually happens, who knows, whether they're a bit conservative. I think there's just some really cool stories there, and I do kind of want, I know we're going on more of a Ratkin tangent here, but I do want to Ratkin to become not evil. We've seen evil rats, we've had those storylines enough. We've had we had humanoid bad rats all the time, and you get that in fantasy battles. How about we go for one that's just trying to survive, trying to exist, that aren't by nature evil? And I think with being enslaved, there's a good excuse for them to not to do that. Now we have encountered slaves before that used to be slaves for the Abyssal Dwarfs, and I think that was in Pious. I think Pious in there, the orcs that were in there were actually escaped slaves as well. So we have seen slaves that have left and still been evil. I think now's a good chance to actually see the opposite of that. And I hope we go down that route. I think there's a lot of story to tell before they could do that. But hey, I think this is a really good opportunity to do that and to really define the difference between the two sides.
Yeah, something that could be interesting too is you could take the Ratkin, make them neutral, and keep the Ratkin Slaves evil. So, and that gives two different.
I think Ratkin Slaves should be evil. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, absolutely. They've got that. So, but yeah, boy, the more of it I think about it, I'd like to see the elf slaves in there or something, and then
I think maybe. Maybe if anything, if we were going to change something with 4th edition, maybe just change the name from Ratkin Slave to just Abyssal Slaves or Abyssal Slavers.
Yeah, that could work.
I think that defines them better, because I think Ratkin Slave is kind of like, all right, so they're just Ratkin. But I think if you really want this to kind of hit the point that you want, change it to Slavers, like maybe Ratkin Slavers, or just Abyssal Slavers, and then that's where you can add in more units that aren't specifically towards Ratkin, and you can really experiment with it. I think there is a lot of evil races, evil factions though, and I can understand, because the conversation about getting rid of factions is a big one at the moment, and there are more evil factions than there are good factions, but I also think that makes it actually a better excuse to keep Ratkin Slaves there, so you still have evil rats, essentially, but also move Ratkins to more of a neutral faction as well, and then that way you can justify having your evil rats in your world, but you can also have a different version of rat.
Yeah, I don't think that they're a throwaway, so
no,
I'm hoping
I think this is... I think there's enough meat there to justify their existence, in my opinion. But I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know, and that's why we want to do this one first, because it's probably the weakest of all the factions, and that's why we're kind of fluffing this out a little bit. We haven't got much to talk about. If you know about Abyssal Dwarfs, if you know about Ratkin, these are just like the Ratkin that didn't get free. That's pretty much all you need to know about the faction. So it's pretty straightforward, and I think the one thing that we know about what defines the difference is just that skin that I referred to of Ratkin Slaves tends to have not just human. It looks like just human skin because all the fur is not there. It's pretty much the one definition between the two, and you can see that in the models too, because the models do show you can see a more fleshy side of it. So that's my interpretation. Whether that was the intention or not sure, but my interpretation is that if you can see if it's got a Ratkin's head and you can see their flesh, as in the pure skin, and look like human flesh, those are the slaves.
There you go. One of the other things that they have in there that's unique to Ratkin Slaves is the last breath, which is some kind of contraption that they talk about that they bring in their units. And in the game, if you destroy a slave unit that has the last breath, you have to roll the damage against yourself, which is very interesting. And it also mentions that, with the last breath, that the Ratkin slaves that trigger that, they think that they're releasing themselves from the pain and, hatred and everything else of this world, but they just end up zipping off to the abyss to become slaves for eternity. So little do they know, they go from the frying pan into the fire. But I think that's kind of an interesting twist.
Yeah, it's a sad existence, basically. And it feels even sadder to, like, the minute that they got free and they're still hated, And I like to think there's a bit of intelligence there. I think if they're modeled after humans, owls, dwarfs, they're not completely stupid. They develop their own language as well. I mean, there's so many elements that you can say, these guys are intelligent, but which way are they going to go in the lore? And I think I really would love Winged Hussar to write a book about just the Ratkin, about the Great Revolt. I think it would be awesome to see that play out as a book form of getting some more details about that, and also help set it in the time period, but also what happens after. Now that the Ratkin are free, is there any organization? Are they just like the Orcs that they'd happened after the God War, that they just run savage throughout the world? Or because we've already seen that, right? So that's why I want Ratkin to be really different. And rats get a bad rap. Rats are really intelligent species. My partner used to have some rats. I didn't live with her at the time, but she always goes on about how they are such intelligent, special kind beings. They're not gross. They're not dirty. The ones that are dirty are the ones, you see, as on TV. They're designed to look gross in, the New York rats. But pet rats, they're very kind and they're very affectionate. So it would be cool to actually start to see that more and more without always demonizing rats. I'm kind of trying to stick up for rats here.
There you go. Well, I mean, we used to have them in our house too. The pet rat craze was big when my daughter went to high school. So her friend had 7 of them. We had 5 of them. They're like small dogs. So
they don't live for very long. It's pretty much the only downside, it sounds like.
They don't live long, and they like to pee on you. So, but my wife loved them too. So, but yeah, we went through the rat craze here. So, but yeah, I mean, that would be possible, that you could get some friendly, intelligent ones that, maybe, evolve a little further than their base form and, strike up some alliances with some halflings or something, who knows,
Yeah, that would be cool. And, it would be cool to see.
There's lots of stories you can write.
Yeah, and I hope so. I hope they do explore it, and because I think one thing, like when Kings of War started, they obviously were trying to not copy, but kind of hit those conventional tropes that you get with fantasy armies like dwarfs and elves and so forth. I think now that we're in 3rd edition, moving to 4th edition, now's the time to show how different are the Kings of War armies and races. And I think showing this kind of side of possible Gnorr of showing, them, being nicer, kinder, something like that, going down that route, I think is a really cool way of showing that why the Kings of War world, Panathor, is so different than all the other worlds. Because I want that. I want more stories. I want more interesting narratives in my gaming, and yeah, we'll see what happens. I guess any final words from you, Mark? About I think we've gasbagged about.
Oh yeah, but you had me think about something else, like keep the Ratkin evil, and then have the Celestians start to affect the minds of the Ratkin slaves, and they start to turn from the abyss, and then they build up, and the next revolt is just to overthrow the abyssal dwarfs from inside, radiating the light of the Celestians. They turn, I don't want to say good, but maybe you put them neutral or something like that, and they they have some kind of, I don't want to say religious cult, but you know what I mean. They find the Celestians and they find the light. I mean, that would be another area you could go. Actually, again, tons of stories.
You make a really good parallel. Now I'm thinking about it. So the Abyssal Dwarfs are the Abyssal Dwarfs because of their religion. So basically, Agrafil, the wicked one. What if out of spite, Gnorr did the opposite of that? They started honoring a particular shining one, and then you started to see not a Gnorr. Maybe what's so you got dwarfs that become abyssal dwarfs when they go for Agrafil. So you got Gnorr. What would you call a light version, like a good version of a Gnorr? Like a shining Gnorr.
There you go. But see, that would make them different.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I really like that idea.
Yeah, that might be interesting.
Because we always hear about like the wicked ones manipulating all these mortal races, but we don't really hear the shining ones doing the same thing. The shining ones are very much like Batman. They don't kill anybody, or they don't kill the people they should kill. They're just trying to keep the peace and trying to do right. But maybe we could see a shining Gnorr, or whatever variation you would call a shining Gnorr. I mean, abyssal dwarf. What would I guess what would be what's the opposite of the abyss, really?
Well, I mean, in Kings of War, it's Basileia, even though everybody say they're so good they're bad. Maybe we
they're
get
more of a faction.
Yeah, but maybe they go from, the Abyssal Ratkin slaves go from they're so, bad they're good, as opposed to they're so good they're bad.
Maybe a faction called the Gnorr of the Celestians.
Or, as opposed to calling them Ratkin slaves, you can call them the Gnorr.
The Gnorr,
right in the face, right? So
maybe just
right
call
there.
them the Gnorr.
You got it.
Or the Shining Gnorr, or something like that. Oh, I think that'd be really cool. I really want that to happen now.
Yeah, but see, and instead the Shining ones can go in there and try to, as opposed to attacking the Abyssal Dwarfs, they go at them from the inside and try to save the Ratkin slaves. I don't know. That would be kind of cool.
I would love to see. I think that would be a really cool campaign, just of these, or even just a book. The story of the Gnorr that broke away from the Abyssal Dwarfs, and then the Shining Ones found them. They gave them the hope. They became this new version of Gnorr after, because they breed really quickly. So you could say only about 5 years they've established this little community of becoming the Shining Gnorr, and then finally their purpose was to rescue other Gnorr, and they've started. There's so much potential. As I said, so much potential for that. That's great.
You know what? That sounds like something for champions.
Yeah, that would be perfect
teams
for
in to save.
So to save the
other
Ratkin slaves, yeah.
Bring them back and save them. Yeah, there you go.
Champions. That could be an expansion pack on champions. I reckon that would be great.
Absolutely.
But as we said, there's a lot of potential here for this faction, which may or may not exist with 4th edition. Me and Mark were both believers of keeping every faction there, because I think one of the best appeals about Kings of War is the fact that you can build the army of your dreams no matter what. Whether you want to be a good dwarf, you could go with a free dwarf, or if you want to be a bad dwarf, you can be an abyssal dwarf. Having that selection is, I think, one of the huge appeals of Kings of War, and the fact of it is, I would feel like it is balanced rather well, but I think hopefully it sticks around. What's your final thoughts about Ratkin Slave there, Mark?
Ratkin Slaves, underappreciated and a blank page that's waiting to be written.
Yeah, agreed. I agreed with that, and I think there's the skeletons of something interesting. They're definitely there. And hopefully it ties in with the Ratkin lore as well. All right, well, I guess we'll finish up with the Ratkin Slave. So as I said, if you want more information, and I personally believe Honest Price is a Ratkin Slave book, go pick it up on its price. Also read the Ratkin and Abyssal Dwarf background, which is available on the free PDF document you can get from the Mantic Games website. Or you could also go to the wiki, which is kingsofwarwiki.com. You can go there and dance around. I obviously work on that because I built the damn thing. But a lot of people have put in some time from the old wiki, and so this hopefully will become the beast that we want it to be. Cool. All right, so we'll move on to a few comments that we've got. So we have
comments.
We have comments now, so thank you everyone that's been watching the show and posting comments on YouTube. Really appreciate it. Thanks for everyone that's reached out, and it's really cool seeing, and it's really encouraging, I think, for the whole MUP team, seeing how many people are watching it. We can see people watching it. We can see the watch time, and we know people do listen to the podcast. But it's different when you see people downloading it. We don't know if they're actually listening to it, but so it's really great to see comments and getting people really involved, especially from our highs and lows video that we did the other day, which I got a comment from Caffeinated Warlord, which I still owe a book to. They won one of our competitions, I think, and they haven't reached out to me yet for it, so they make sure to reach out. But Caffeinated Warlord also got a YouTube channel, go check it out. Says, I'm immensely excited for the Flawless Celestians, and you've convinced me to pre-order. Personally, I think something has to come out for Kings this year to maintain, if not drive momentum. The game with no releases this year just falls away from the public consciousness. There's nothing to advertise, either 4th edition or a real range refresh / new army, and definitely not Trident Realm style refresh. Haha, well said, Mark. So there you go, Mark. Someone agrees with you.
Cheers, Caffeinated Warlord. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree.
I think that 100%. Yeah, I think the 100% right. They need a good injection. I think with Kings of War Champions is a good one. 4th edition, whether that comes or not. I think Army Refresh. I think they were on the right track with the Forces of the Abyss refresh. That felt not really a refresh. That felt like more of an addition. But the additions that they made were good. I think the Lord of Lies was a really great model. I think the new units with the Nagarai, but we're also looking at the Forces of the Abyss Armada army as well. So we had really cool additions there, but I think the Trident rounds fell away is because I think everyone feels this way, is that you did the Lord of Lies for the Forces of the Abyss. You should have did the Trident Kings with the Trident Realms releases as well. I think that's what was missing there, and that's what people want. They love, and that comes with the lore too. I mean, the Lord of Lies came from the lore. It was mentioned in 2nd edition, but that unit itself is directly tied with the story of Kings of War. So it's so important, and I think it's begging for, especially Kings of War this year, is begging for some real injection of some really cool stuff, I reckon.
Yeah, besides all the cool lore that's coming with Champions, with expanding and being so coherent with our current lore, I agree. I'd like to see the Herd. I'd like to see, like, Green Lady would be awesome. Yeah. I mean, just that would be fantastic. Boy, wouldn't that be a great 4th edition starter set? Herd versus the Green Lady.
Oh, that would be. I mean, she was in the lore of the Clash of Kings 2025. She was there with Brave Chiron as well. I think Brave Chiron will be great with the Herd. I would say put Brave Chiron with the Herd, and then put the Green Lady maybe with the Forces of Abyss later on. Not Forces of Abyss, sorry. The Nature. The Forces of Nature. I think you could put the Green Lady with Force in it, because in the Rise of the Celestians, she basically creates the forces of nature, and there's a really good moment of her of like she uses all of her powers to spring up all these glade walkers and stuff, and so she actually is the origins of the forces of nature. So I think she's better there, but I do agree that would be a wicked starter for 4th edition.
Oh yeah, but that's something that we need to get everybody excited about. I think the refreshes were okay. I'll just repeat myself, but Triumph Realms, I think they missed the boat on the Frogs on Frogs action. We already had all those models. They weren't. It was like, okay, I already got them. I really wanted placoderms. I think that was the big thing that we missed out on was placoderms.
Correct. Yeah, and, I think they should have done it. They should have released a lot of that kind of stuff because it's what people wanted. I mean, listen to your fans. The fans, there's some ridiculous ideas out there from fans, but they also know what they want. If they're going to spend money on stuff they want, it's typically how it works. I mean, it's all good to have a miss once in a while, but I think the Force of Abyss is a good example of what they should be doing going forward. So yeah, thank you, Caffeinated Warlord. And so now we're going to go on to the winner of our competition from last time. So last time we asked about whether orcs should be, Riftforged Orcs should be their own faction, and Horde of Things, which is a really good name because it's Horde, said, in answer to your question, yes, Orcs should definitely stay their own separate faction in terms of Riftforged Orcs and Orcs being their own separate things. So Horde of Things, you win the competition. Oops, sorry, my alarm's going off. You win the competition, so just make sure you send an email to kingsofwarwiki@gmail.com with your details, and I will chuck in a pre-order for Claws on a Plane, I believe it's called. Yes, that will come out in March, and I'll flick it your way.
There you go. Thanks, Horde of Things. I agree with you.
Yes, I think we're all on the same page. Only because me and Mark want all the factions, so
yes,
we just want to hold them.
It's like trying to decide which of your children to get rid of. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. So we're going to do another competition because I like doing them. So this week's competition question will be, and the prize will be an honest price book. So I will send that out to you. The question is, what is one thing that you would add to Ratkin Slaves to make it better? So what would be one thing you would like to add, whether it's a unit, whether it's a story from something from the lore, anything. So what's one thing you want to add to Ratkin Slaves to make them a better faction overall from a lore point of view? And yeah, we'll give a prize of Honest Price, which is by Mike Rossi. And hopefully you can agree with what I'm saying there of it being more of a Ratkin Slave versus Free Dwarfs story rather than Abyssal Dwarfs versus Free Dwarfs story. There we go. How about you, Mark? You can answer it. You only can do one thing. What is one thing, if you could pick anything, to add to Ratkin Slaves that you think would make it better? Just one thing.
Well, I mentioned it earlier in the episode, so I've got two. I'm going to have to pick one.
You have to do one.
And I'll say make it the first 2-army theme list and mix in some Abyss. How about you, Dave?
I would add more different types of slaves in terms of one of its units. So from a unit point of view, you've only got like Gnorr slaves. I would add more types of slave. Maybe a unit that can be that can have options. You know how you can do options on a unit, and you can have them being orc slaves, human slaves, elf slaves, or even dwarf slaves, and all four of them have different attributes, and that's how the models are made up.
Very, very good. That's awesome.
But anyway, yeah, just flick it through. Either send it to email address at kingsofwarwiki@gmail.com, or leave a comment on one of the lore videos that we have on the YouTube channel, or just reach out to us on Discord or on Facebook. So either way, not a lot of people entered the competition, so the more the merrier, and the more that we can have to talk about it. So yeah, there we go.